you don't necessarily feel like a mother when you don't have a child physically. It takes you understanding that you did give birth. You had a child. And I mean that even in that, like, yes, I had my daughter and I physically gave birth to her, but I've also had 2 miscarriages. And you loved those babies the minute you knew they were yours. That's the thing you have to understand, is that they were yours, no matter what. How you want to share them is up to you. I wanted to make sure that Alivia was part of our family because she made me a mother. She made my husband a father. She made us a family.
You just lost your loved one. Now what? Welcome to the Grief and Life podcast, where we explore this new reality through grief-colored lenses. Openly, authentically, I'm your host, Nina Rodriguez. Let's get started.
How do we carry the weight of love and loss and still find ways to offer light to others? Joining me today is Liz Quinn, a compassionate voice in the grief space, creator of the Healing Hearts podcast, a grief writer, and a fellow member of the Get Griefy collective. On her platforms, she shares stories of loss and healing, from the passing of her firstborn daughter, Alivia, in 2008, to the loss of both of her parents in 2018 and 2020, as well as that of her guest stories of loss and resilience, to make space for connection, healing, and truth as we all navigate grief. These moments of loss have deeply shaped the person who she is today, and her work reminds others that they are not alone in grief. Liz, I am so grateful for this conversation with you today, and I'd like to give you a warm welcome to the Grief and Life podcast.
Thank you so much for having me, Nina. And what a beautiful introduction. Coming from someone who writes them as well, it's just very different to be on this end. And so thank you so much for the warm welcome and for the beautiful introduction and everything.
It's an absolute honor to have you, my friend. And I know exactly what you mean. The feeling is a little different when you're on the interview side of the conversation. Your story is very powerful. It's obviously, bittersweet with all of the grief that comes with it, but you've been such a beautiful voice in the space and a place of comfort and a soft place to land for other bereaved mothers and people who have lost their parents as well in this community. So start with the loss of Alivia and how that shaped grief for you at that time.
Yeah. So losing Alivia, definitely a big shock to motherhood. And it was one of those that I lost Alivia shortly after she was born. I had I don't want to say a perfect pregnancy, like that picture perfect pregnancy, but it was as perfect as you can imagine, no real complications. I did have gestational diabetes, which is just something that you can develop in pregnancy. It just means you have to watch what you're eating and things like that. And I did really well with that, so I didn't have to progress to anything else. My pregnancy with Alivia was also a surprise. My husband and I had only been married for about 3 months. He was still in college. I had just graduated. So I was working as a substitute teacher to help kind of like support him while he went to school. And it was just one of those, oh man. And I knew the minute I was walking into the Walgreens to buy a pregnancy test, I was pregnant. I didn't need the test for reassurance.
You had that intuition.
I just took the test, and I just knew. I was that regular at the time, and I just knew. So it definitely terrified us at first because we were 23, just married, husband still in school, barely making ends meet because that's just what we are. Living in an apartment, and as scared as we were also very excited. From that very first heartbeat that you hear at like that 8 to 12 week range, we just knew she was meant to be ours. And so started the planning stages of, okay, we do have an extra bedroom in that apartment. What theme do we want to do? We have to keep it cheap because, well, we don't have the money to, do all the things. So we went with the Winnie the Pooh theme because I was a big Winnie the Pooh fan in high school and had a bunch of already figurines and such. And it's actually very popular, so it was easy to find hand-me-downs and things like that at garage sales or consignment sales, which is where we did majority of our nursery shopping. And like I said, pregnancy went relatively well. My best friend was an OB nurse, so she kind of gave me the ins and outs of what to expect and not expect when it came to pregnancy or feeling nervous about things. And I didn't have any real reason to feel nervous because I hadn't known anyone that had experienced a loss. So that naiveness that you have in pregnancy, if you haven't experienced a loss, you have it, and it's beautiful. And so, like I said, everything went relatively well. Alivia was born July 23rd, 2008. I went in for my 40-week appointment July 22nd, and I was like 2 centimeter, like I was barely laboring, but I was laboring enough that my doctor was like, go home and walk. Just walk, 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 and I'll check back with you in the evening. I was done being pregnant at that point. Like it was in the middle of summer. It was hot. So she knew that I
You're
was like,
ready.
it was ready
Yeah.
to meet this girl. It was time to meet our daughter. And I did exactly what she told us, and we walked. My husband was prepping for a big final. He was in summer school at the time, and he was finishing up his for a final so that he could be done with school just in time for baby to be born. So I remember him studying and taking notes of how far apart my contractions are. I remember their notes being like, okay, this is 7 minutes. And then I remember I was taking the long walk. And when she called to check in, she was like, okay, come in. Let's see where you are. At that point, I was at 4 centimeters, so much of face and things. And she's like, let's walk the halls of the hospital. It was like 6 o'clock p.m. And so I walked the halls of the hospital, and around 10 p.m. on the evening of the 22nd, I was admitted and labor began. They broke my water. I didn't have an epidural. I didn't have any pain meds. I had a lot of back labor. And so they would give me these heating pads to put on my back, but I have a high tolerance for heat, and they were never hot enough. Um, so always like within 10 minutes, the nurse had to bring me another one. And so I labored through the night. For the most part, everything went well up until it was time to push. About 6 o'clock in the morning, the doctors was like, it's time to push, and between there, it was just finding ways that you're comfortable, broke my water, putting the monitors. There was nothing exciting that happened between the time I was admitted to the time I push.
There were no
No
like
scary
signs,
lease.
nothing
Mm-mm.
concerning. It was just
No,
very uneventful, if you
yeah,
will.
very
Okay.
normal laboring pregnancy, birth and things like that. Even my best friend, who's an OB nurse there with me, said the same thing. There was no reasons to be concerned. And so I came to push. I pushed for about 2.5 hours. In that staging of pushing, her heart rate did go down, but that's very common because she's now going down through the birth canal. It's going to be harder to get the heart rate, all of the things. So there was nothing that showed any concern. It wasn't until like she was born. So she had a hard time coming out. So they did have to use the vacuum a little bit, but nothing else. Again, nothing to be concerned until my final push. She came out with a slight heartbeat, but was not breathing. Um, I, so she didn't cry. I don't know all of the details. My husband has a better vision of like how fast everything went, where we went from having maybe 3 or 4 people in the room to having 20, like a
Wow.
lot of people, because this was a really unexpected thing to happen. They weren't
Did you
expecting.
understand in that moment what was happening? Or
Yes
that
and
something
no.
was happening?
Sometimes, I mean, yes and no. I knew that. Um, I knew something was wrong because obviously she wasn't crying. She wasn't coming onto me. My husband's face was definitely pale. My best friend was just trying to comfort me, but at the same time, she was terrified. I still had placenta to deliver. We delivered at a teaching hospital. So one of the OB residents delivered my placenta while my OB doctor went with my daughter. My best friend stayed with me as my husband, Nathan, went with Alivia. Wherever Alivia had to go, my husband went with her. And I had my best friend with me to help me through what was coming up. I don't remember it, but I do have a picture. I'm pretty sure my mom, probably my best friend, took it before she left our room. There's a picture of her like all hooked up to her tubes and me literally crying and like reaching for her. I'm grateful for the picture, but it definitely depicts a very of what's going on. I'm stuck here and now she has to go. And it was probably several hours later that my husband came back and gave me a little bit of a rundown of that, like, she's on tubes, she was born with a slight heartbeat but not breathing. The neuro, there's a name for it, the doctor came down and said lots of really big words. And then in reality it was just, we're going to give her 24 hours and see what happens, because a lot of things can change in 24 hours for infants. They're very resilient. And unfortunately, that just was not the case for our sweet Alivia. She lived on breathing tubes for about 34 hours in the NICU, where we were able to love her and hold her and care for her, and family came and went to see her. We have some amazing memories just in those moments. As hard as they are, I'm incredibly grateful for them. In the moment, I definitely just remember feeling sad. What happened? And later, I definitely remember feeling, what did I do wrong? Because I'm her mom. I'm supposed to protect her at all costs. And there's nothing I could have done to protect her in this moment. So her breathing tube eventually went into her esophagus. And we were then at that point given the opportunity to either re-intubate or let her go. And the only reason to re-intubate was to let my sister, who was still flying from Charleston, South Carolina, to see her alive. This, in a sense, we felt was Alivia telling us it was time to say goodbye. They had done everything. We were now just holding on to barely any hope. And so she at about 6:00 that evening, of the 24th, we retook the tubes out, and my husband and I held her. And at 6:08 p.m., my daughter died in my husband's arms. She lived on her own, breathing on her own for 8 minutes.
Thank you so much for sharing. And I'm so sorry. That is just, I'm sure it doesn't get any easier to say it. And I could almost like relive those moments with you or just imagine them with you. And I'm so sorry for anybody listening or watching who has experienced this type of loss, because there truly are no words. And one thing that stood out to me is that you said you were, at the time, it was your first child, you were young, it was unexpected. You had no idea that there were these possibilities, that this was an actual possibility. So what a heart-crushing reality. And also, even to this day, a lot of mothers, especially young women, are not aware of the statistics, and they're not aware of the chances of something going wrong. And I learned later on in my life that it's actually higher than we may realize. And a lot of women are left to face this reality. Like you said, initially have that sense of guilt and that sense of, what did I do wrong? Was there something wrong with me? Was there something wrong with anything we did along the way? But there really wasn't anything. So I'm so sorry.
Yeah, no, there really wasn't. I mean, given the way she passed, we did have an autopsy done. The conclusion that the medical examiner came down to was that it could have been group B strep. Group B strep is a natural organism that lives in that area of women, and you get tested for it around 36 weeks when you're pregnant. And if you're positive and you're going to have a baby, you get penicillin. I had tested positive. I remember it went in early. There's no real reason for it to be group B strep, other than that's just what all the signs pointed to in an autopsy. So we will never really know if that's true or not true. I have gone on to have 3 beautiful rainbow babies. And when I got pregnant with my daughter, Zoe, who is now 14, we took a lot of precautions that we didn't take, obviously, with Alivia. And one of them was making sure that I got tested for Group B strep every 6 weeks, just because of what the medical examiner said. And every time I would get tested, I'd test positive. So my doctor drawed the conclusion that I have a higher concentration of that organism inside of my body, that we could do a lot of testing and could have done, all kinds of experiments to find out how much penicillin I would need. I didn't need to know. I needed to bring home a baby healthy. That is all that mattered. So I could have been this really cool science experiment, but that's probably a good indication that if I was ever to give birth vaginally again, if I ever would want to, which I don't, that's a whole nother traumatic situation. But it was good to know that maybe that was a reason, and not that I needed one, because with a reason or without a reason, it doesn't bring her back. It doesn't change the fact that I'm her mother. It doesn't change the fact that I have to mother a child not here.
Yeah.
So
did you understand that intuitively, the whole being a mother to somebody heaven side to beautiful Alivia, or was that something that you had to build a relationship with her in spirit? How was that journey for
you
you?
definitely had to build, because you don't necessarily feel like a mother when you don't have a child physically. It takes time. Honestly, it takes you understanding that you did give birth. You had a child. And I mean that even in that, like, yes, I had my daughter and I physically gave birth to her, but I've also had 2 miscarriages. And that same loss, like, you're still a mother because you loved those babies the minute you knew they were yours. And I think that's the thing you have to understand, is that they were yours no matter what. And so once you start to realize, okay, they are mine, how you want to share them is up to you. I wanted to make sure that Alivia was part of our family because she made me a mother. She made my husband a father. She made us a family. And it was definitely not an easy road. Like, you have your ups and your downs. And one of my very first moments of denying Alivia as my child was, I don't remember the exact moment, but I do remember being asked if I had any children. It was probably shortly after losing Alivia, within at least the first year, but I'm going to say probably within the first 3 or 4 months, because by Christmas we were already starting to honor her, and have her presence. So within those 3 to 4 months, I was asked if I had any children, and I said no. And I immediately went to my car and cried. I will never forget that moment. I can still feel the heaviness of it had on my heart, that, like, how could I have denied Alivia? She is part of me. And so I knew from that moment on, I would never, ever deny who she was. She was my daughter. I will always, when people ask me, how many children do you have? There's variations of how I answer it, because it all kind of depends on who you're talking to. I think that happens in any type of loss, how you're going to answer if both of my parents passed, or I'm just going to be like, well, they're not here. Like, there's just different ways of answering that. And so sometimes I'll answer it, yeah, I have 3 here, 1 in heaven. Sometimes I'll just say I have 4. And if they decide to ask more questions, then I'll give them the actual answer. But sometimes it's just as easy as, well, I have 4, because sometimes they don't need any more details.
I have so much
But
compassion for that version of you, because it is mental gymnastics, especially those first few times when you have to answer the question, you're not even sure what to say. And I've spoken with some grievers who say, I said I didn't have my person, whoever that was to them, because I didn't have the capacity to talk about it. Like, my throat was closing up, my body was shaking. So it was easier to say, no, I don't have this person. But that moment when you utter those words out loud can be soul crushing. So I have so much compassion for you. It also sounds like it gave you that feedback to say, no, I'm never doing that again. She is very much a part of our lives.
yeah. Yeah. I didn't start honoring her and really embracing her into our family until probably that Christmas. Like, I mean, we always did something, but not as much out loud as I do now. That first Christmas
What
was,
shifted? What was it that? maybe?
Honestly, sometimes moms know best. So my mom, Olivia's grandmother, who is no longer with us now, but she was a wonderful grandmother even to her lost baby. Because at Christmas, obviously, I didn't want to celebrate. I was supposed to have a 5-month-old baby bouncing around, making the holiday that much more enjoyable. Babies bring so much joy to the holidays. And that's what I was supposed to be experiencing. That's what my parents were supposed to be experiencing. I was supposed to be able to see them as grandparents. I'd grown up seeing them as grandparents. My brother and sister are 10 and 7 years older than I. I saw them be grandparents to my brother and sister's kids, and they were wonderful. So I was very excited for them to be grandparents to my children. And to have that ripped from them and myself, it was just I wanted nothing to do with Christmas. Like, I didn't intend to put up a Christmas tree. I didn't intend to do anything. Nathan and I already said we weren't really going to buy Christmas gifts for each other. We would buy them for our family because that's the thing you should do. We were with my mom visiting, and she was setting up Christmas stuff because that's her thing and she loved it. When growing up, she had a 6-foot tree she called her teddy bear tree. And so it was decorated with all kinds of teddy bears and white lights and really pretty garland. And it was always really pretty. And it was always really in the kitchen and just a little focal point. And at one point, I think we went to St. Vinny's, which is a consignment store. And she was like, "You should put up a tree." And I'm like, "Mom, I already told you I'm not celebrating Christmas this year. I will celebrate with you and we will do the things we usually do. But in my own apartment, in my own house, I'm just not there." And she's like, "Okay, I understand." But when we were leaving, we lived about an hour and a half away from my parents when we had Alivia. And when we were getting ready to leave, because we went there probably to do laundry, my mom had put her 6-foot tree and all of the things, minus the teddy bears, into the back of our car. And she's like, "Just in case, just in case." And I'm like, "Fine, I'll humor you because you're my mother and I love you, but it's not happening." And it sat in the car for probably 2 weeks. It just sat in the back of the car because there was no reason for it to come in the house. I was not making a tree. And I don't know what came over me one afternoon. I decided that maybe a tree could be okay. Maybe just a tree would be okay. I went to the car and I set up my mom's little 6-foot tree with her white lights and her crystal garland. I looked at it and was like, it needs ornaments. So Nathan, my husband, and I went to all of the stores and bought all of the ornaments that were angels or white or butterflies that reminded me of Alivia. And we decorated our very first Alivia angel tree. And we have had that version of that tree for the last 16 years. A tradition that we do with her siblings today.
Wow.
And it's one of those stories that gives me so much joy because it is honoring my daughter, but it's also remembering that my mom just sometimes knew more than I did. And it's so special now that she's not here.
It sounds really special. And thank you for sharing that piece of your heart with us, because that sounds like a continuation from your mother's tradition to Alivia to now your family. And for years to come, maybe they will take that with them in the future as well. Thank you for your vulnerability. I know this is not easy to recount, but it's beautiful to share as well. So what would you say to a bereaved mother who has experienced loss and who is thinking what to do next? Do I continue to grow my family? And is in that in-between stage of not knowing what to do? What would you say to that person?
It's a very delicate situation to be in. And I think when you feel ready, you will be ready. Obviously, right after losing Alivia, we were not ready by any means. So there was a friend of mine that was pregnant right around the same time I was. She actually had her daughter 3 days after I had Alivia. I knew pretty early that I wasn't ready to have babies in my life, partly because of that experience. You just know. There's no right or wrong way to decide when you're ready to have a baby after a loss. You either know or you just do it. I wish I could say there's this beautiful moment and you just have it all figured out. You don't. Even when you think you know, it's still harder than hell. With Alivia being a surprise and it's general, our plan of when we were going to have kids, everything went out the window. We originally talked about waiting because we were going to wait till Nathan graduated to even start having a family. And then Alivia came and left, and the plan was then, okay, well, we'll just stick to the original plan. After you graduate, we'll continue our family. That changed real quick. About a year after losing Alivia, our lives was like, we want a family and we want a baby, because when we feel like we were supposed to have one. And for me to know it was time was, I was at a wedding and one of my really good friends was getting married and she had already had a baby, and she wanted to dance with her husband, and she tossed me a baby. She was like, can you hold him? And I'm like, I haven't held him. Sure. And holding him was the indication of, I want one of these.
I love that. It's almost like that moment putting up the Christmas tree. Even though it sat there for 2 weeks, there was just that moment of, you know what? Maybe we do put up just the tree.
Yeah.
And then maybe we do put ornaments on it. It's just that moment that kind of comes.
Yeah, it was just like a full circle. Like I hadn't really held a baby that I wanted to. I had been forced to hold babies because that's what you think you should be doing, is supporting friends. So that friend that had a baby, she would have me hold her baby. And I was like, well, she's my friend. I'm supposed to hold her baby. I learned real quickly, no, you're not supposed to do anything. You don't want to hold a baby, don't hold a baby. Don't want to go to a baby shower, don't go to a baby shower. Those things are okay. You're not taught any of that. You just kind of have to navigate it and figure it out on your own. At least I did. I think it's a lot more said now that it's okay to say, no, I don't want to do this because, this is where I am in my process. But holding that little boy for the first time and being okay holding a baby was kind of an indication of like, okay, we could do this. We got pregnant. I wanted everything in my power not to be pregnant at the same time that I was with Alivia. Did not go that way. My daughter is pretty much born 2 years later. Zoe's birthday's in July, just at the beginning of July instead of at the end. I wanted everything to be completely different, which I don't know if is normal or not. Of course, I'm grateful that she is who she is and, all the things. But in that, when I first started trying to get pregnant, it was triggering. I'm due in July. Okay.
How did you ground yourself throughout that process?
Journaling. I did a lot of journaling for the first 5 years after Olivia's passing, was just journaling. A lot of journaling. Therapy support group was probably one of the major things that got us through even pregnancy after loss. As hard as going to a support group pregnant and talking about loss, because they're wonderful and I will always advocate for them, they're also very hard because you learn other ways babies can die.
Yeah, it's like this dichotomy where the more you learn, the more you feel seen and less alone. And at the same time, you're horrified that this happens to people. These other horrible things can actually happen.
Yeah, I had heard of stillborn. I had heard of miscarriage. I have heard of all the different ways, but I had not experienced them the way I did meeting people in support group. And when you're pregnant after a loss and still want to be able to mourn your daughter, it's hard. But it was one of the first places that I went to, and I was known as Olivia's mom. It was not Liz. Even after Zoe was born, I wasn't Zoe's mom. I was just Olivia's mom. Now with my kids in school, I am Zoe's mom, Logan's mom, Grayson's mom. I'm never just known as Olivia's mom. And so it's really kind of cool when you step into that space or you meet a mom that only remembers you as Olivia's mom.
So that is really beautiful. And you mentioned Olivia's siblings. How has their relationship with Alivia been shaped over the years?
That is one thing I did not expect. You spend so much time on your own grief that you kind of forget that they're going to have it too. I didn't think about them experiencing grief because they didn't know who she was. It's not why would they grieve. It was just more of like, oh, yeah, she is their sibling because we've done that. We have created her in our family. Her picture is hung up on her walls. We talk about her. The Alivia tree we've done every year. They've known nothing else. So she is their older sister. And I will say that that was probably one of the hardest parts, was realizing they have grief over a sibling they don't know. Very unexpected. It was not on my grief radar at all.
The grief radar, I like that. I love that. Thank you for sharing that. I have met other mothers who say, I was not expecting that my kid would actually have a relationship with their sibling whom they've never met. It just speaks to the bonds that we have with our loved ones, whether it be your child in that case, and in their case, their sibling. It goes beyond the physical loss of our person and our loved one. And it is possible to have continued bonds and have those relationships. It doesn't have to look any way other than what you make of it. In your case with Olivia's tree, and all the ways we get to carry their love light forwards. I also want to touch on the loss of your parents, because that's another type of grief that is really life altering, and perhaps start with their names.
Yeah, so my parents' name are Ed and Colleen Fox. They were amazing. Definitely had their ups and downs, as all parents do, but ultimately they did the best they could. And I feel like that's the generation that they come from. They just did the best they could. My mom was diagnosed with dementia in 2016, and then eventually it turned into Alzheimer's. She deteriorated rather quickly, considering dementia and Alzheimer's can take like tens of years, and hers was probably within 4 or 5. And my dad became her primary caregiver at that point. My sister and my brother lived out of state. I lived out of state. It was just my dad and my mom being empty nesters and enjoying life. My mom had gone through a lot of back problems, so she wasn't working. My dad was working and she was home. And that's kind of where the start of recognizing that she was repeating herself, blank stare for a while. So my dad knew something was wrong, took her to get her diagnosed, which was a fight in itself, because they're like, she's just getting old. And yeah, it's just getting old, but there's more. And my dad became her primary caregiver. He still worked and kept taking care of her. Eventually he couldn't take care of her physically at his house anymore, so he had to put her into a nursing home near the house. He went every day, twice a day. I know he ate dinner with them. He was very well known within the nursing home, not just to my mom, but to other people, and the nurses and everyone just loved him. And because he spent so much time being a caregiver and taking care of my mom, his own health took a backburn. My dad had been experiencing a cough for probably several months, if not longer, for a while. But eventually he realized that he needed to go to the doctor. He was a vet, so he went to VA, and lo and behold, this persistent little cough actually was one of the first signs of a esophageal cancer. He was diagnosed with stage 4 cancer. And unfortunately, it's partly because of his smoking and his drinking. Like, those are very, very big indicators of the type of cancer he had. He had been smoke-free for over 10 years at that point, but he was determined to beat it. He was like, this is not taking me down. And so he went through all of the chemo and all of the things. I gave birth to my last son, Logan, on the very first day of his chemo treatment on December 27th, 2017.
How did you get through that?
Honestly, my dad, just being who he was like, I'm just doing chemo. It's no big deal. Like, like, you're having a baby. Have a baby and I'll do chemo and we'll be fine. And
We'll talk after.
that's like, we'll talk later. Like, that's just who he was. And that's how he powered through chemo and all of the things. And he did really well, surprisingly well with chemo. Unfortunately, he experienced what they call the delayed reaction to chemo. So he finished his chemo, I believe, in May. of 2017, and he was still working. Like, he was a stock boy at a grocery store. He was doing all the things. He was still checking in on my mom as much as he could. And it got to be like June, middle of June, he started to like slow down and started saying that I'm going to take a break from work, and so like we were concerned, but my dad was one of those that, didn't give us the full information because he's prideful. He didn't want to admit defeat in any way. I lived in Pittsburgh at the time, and my parents live in Wisconsin. We were scheduled to go back to Wisconsin in July of 2017 to see my dad and their family. When we walked into my parents' house at the time, my dad was in bed and sleeping, which is very unlike him. And it was just not a good situation. It was very, you could just tell that he had been sleeping probably 20 hours at a time, like it was just, and he was skin and bones. He was just not okay. Should not be in this house by himself. He had a PET scan or something to see how things were going. And they'd found bumps on his kidney, so they wanted to biopsy it. In the middle of the biopsy, his lung collapsed. So he had to immediately be admitted into the hospital and be watched for that. And in that part of that, we were then in the talks of palliative care. No one knew for sure how much time he had or not had. He was still in decent spirits, but he definitely could feel his body like going out on him, even though he wasn't ready to go. And so we were talking with palliative care, and I had to return to Pittsburgh. Like, I couldn't stay and take care of him. So we decided to place him in the same nursing home as my mom. I didn't think he was going to beat cancer, but I definitely thought he had a while. Like, it was not going to be quick, but this was the next best thing. He'd be with mom. He could be with other people that knew him. A week later, we received the phone call that he'd pretty much deteriorated over a day and passed away.
Yeah. I'm so sorry. And at this point, your mother was still here. Like, she went after him.
She was still here. She was in the nursing home.
Was she aware at that point of what was happening, or
no?
Very limited.
Her time span of really her long-term memory was totally intact. Her short-term memory was probably maybe 20 minutes. So she knew my dad. She knew who he was, and he was the love of her life and all the things. But much more than that, no. So my dad passed. We had his funeral. 2 years later, my mom passed away. Same month, which is funny because they were born in the same month.
Wow. So it all happens.
Yeah.
The same. I could relate in the sense that my brother was born September 10th and he passed the 11th. So usually the months when you have somebody's birthday and they're passing and all these other things, it carries layers.
Their birthday's not in the same month, but they were born in March, but they both died in August. So it's just kind of like that correlation that like they were a year and 10 days apart, and then they died 2 years and 20 some days apart. And my mom's death was a more expected, obviously, because she had Alzheimer's. They gave us as much of a timeline as they could to tell us like when to be there. My brother lived the closest. He lived about 5 hours away. So we made arrangements to come probably within the next 5 days. My brother, being close, decided to drive up early. And when he got there, he immediately called me and my sister and said, "You guys should come." We immediately went to the nursing home and saw my mom. Now, remind you, we're in the middle of COVID. It's August 2020. We are allowed to go in, but we had to wear a mask. We're not supposed to touch you. But as hard as losing my mom was, it was a beautiful moment. Like, it was a moment for me and my sister to share our love, our heart, how much she meant to us. We shared memories. We had one moment where we're like, we just want to hug you. And me and my sister were like, we're just going to do it. We hugged her. And at that point, my mom could not move very much, and she jerked her arm. So it was kind of like she was hugging back.
Almost like her acknowledgement of that moment.
It felt like she was, and my mom also she had really long arms. She always called them her monkey arms. And because she had long monkey arms, she gave the best hugs. And so it was a beautiful moment to feel like she was trying to hug us back, because that was what she did. She was one of the best huggers we knew. We intended to come back the next morning to see her. And we received a phone call that morning that she had passed in the night. My brother, unfortunately, didn't get quite the experience my sister and I did, but he did get to see her. And I think that is ultimately what she needed to say goodbye. She needed all of her kids to know that she loved us.
Yeah, I hear you. Well, I'm sorry for your losses, and thank you for sharing those moments of bittersweetness. It's painful, it's messy, and yet getting through those moments is something so personal, how we each do it, how it happens, the opportunities to say goodbye and not having those opportunities to say goodbye, and it all shapes us as humans in everything that follows, because each loss is different. I would imagine that with Alivia, it's also the loss of dream, of seeing all the pictures of your kids growing up and imagining her where she should have been. And also, your parents, everything that they miss out on, and also how you navigate life and you show up in the world after that. I thank you for being so open about your beautiful story, even the painful parts. I know it's going to help many, and you already help many with your podcast. I do want to give some time to talking about the Healing Hearts podcast and the way that you support bereaved mothers and other people in grief. How did your grief evolve into the work that you're doing today?
So the loss of my mom really put perspective for myself. I always say the loss of my mom was my hardest loss. And my husband will say, after I lost my dad, I went more into a spiral than I did with my mom. My husband says that my mom is what showed me that I needed to do more. I needed to do something else than sit in my pain. I sat in the pain with my dad. With my mom, I picked myself up and started to find layers and pieces of myself again. I didn't see it until he gave me that perspective, because my mom and I were best friends. We were so close. I always assumed her loss was devastating, and it was, but differently. After I lost my mom, I then started to realize that I wanted my health to be better. Both of my parents, were deteriorating because of some type of health issue. My dad with his cancer and my mom being diagnosed with Alzheimer's. I can't say for sure if I'm going to or not have it, but I do know that, as medicine and life has improved, there are things I can do to better myself. And one of those was taking control of my health. And in that moment, it was really just something to take control of, because in grief, nothing is controllable. So I could focus on making sure my water was good, that I got exercise, that I was eating healthy. So that's what I did at the very beginning. My grief journey turned into my health journey. I was able to lose 100 pounds. And by focusing on my health and by focusing on myself, I started to realize that I could do more in this space as well. It took me a solid year to do the podcast, because I'm human like everyone else, and self-doubt and all of the things telling you, who are you to do anything like this? What do you have to share with the world? You have to tame that. You have to say, no, if I help one person, then I've done my job. And so Healing Hearts podcast was created out of just that idea of, if I can help one person, that is all that matters. And in that process of finding health, I listened to, grief podcasts, and I read books and things like that. And your podcast is one of the very first podcasts that I listened to. And it was one of those first, well, maybe I can. We just wrapped up season 2 of Healing Hearts podcast. Season 3 interviewing has started, and I think I'm just starting to get the rhythm and starting to get the growth. That first year of starting something, it's all new to you too, and so you're kind of figuring it out. I think I'm finally getting my footing. I use the space to let people share their stories. I say, your story matters, and it deserves to be heard if you want to share it, because everyone has a story and that story matters. But if you don't want to share it, you don't have to. But I love the idea that there is a platform, there is a space for you to share it if you want it. So often, a lot of my guests do use their pain or their grief to do something amazing with. But I've had a few that just wanted to share their story. So they just shared their story. They didn't have this, they took their loss and their pain and created a podcast or created a magazine or stationery. They just wanted someone else to know I've been there. And that's powerful in itself.
Truly. And thank you for embracing that calling, because it feels like a calling to share these stories. It's not easy, especially when so many touch us so personally and where we can really feel the pain. We don't know the reality. We're not the other person, but we could feel how difficult that moment in their life was and how they had to navigate forward. And so I see that in you as well. I see your resilience. I see what you've done with your grief, like you said it. I have to go back and rewatch your exact words, because you said it so beautifully about how you you leaned into your grief to become the person that you are today and to hold space for other people so beautifully and so powerfully and so meaningfully. I think uh, that's such a beautiful thing to do. And also, you don't have to. And I know that you have some things coming up for Bereaved Mother's Day here in May. This episode's going to be released just before. So anything that you care to share in terms of what you have coming up? That would
So
be
airing for Healing Hearts podcast is honoring bereaved mothers by having a special podcast panel of lost moms, varying when they had their loss, varying with the station, all the things. I mean, miscarriage, we stillbirth, we infant loss. We have 16 years, 8 years, 35 years since their loss. We'll have an open discussion answering these questions. And because we're all at different stages, because we've all had different experience with loss, it will be a beautiful conversation on how each of us lived after loss of a child. I'm really excited about it. It's just a beautiful conversation that I would have loved to be able to have when I had first lost Olivia. And so that's what I think about when I create things, is just like, what would I want?
Thank you for the beautiful space you've created. I'm sure it's going to help many. And for those who may or may not know, May 4th, I believe, is Bereaved Mother's Day. And then we have Mother's Day this year on May 11th. Something to keep in mind, we want to acknowledge everybody that's gone through this, all the losses and all the lives that are remembered and carried forth in what we do. I love that you mixed different types of losses and different times, because the general consensus that grief is something we get over and with time things get easier. And so when you hear somebody who's perhaps 20, 30 years down the line saying, no, I still carry it with me, that's just the nature of grief, because it's that other side of love that we get to carry with us. It creates a different sense of awareness, a different perspective. It softens something within of not being so hard on ourselves as to how we navigate forward. So thank you for
Absolutely.
that. Where
I
can
think
people find
there's
information about your podcast and this event?
any place that you listen to podcasts, all the normal ones like Apple and Spotify. And then you can find me at Instagram at healing underscore hearts underscore podcast, where I share all of the event information and more information on the podcast and just in general things that might be helpful. I try to be as honest and raw about it right now, So, yeah.
You do a beautiful job of that. And of course, it'll be linked in the show notes. Is there anything that we didn't touch on that you would like to include in this conversation to consider it complete?
I think the biggest thing to just share is that shared stories are a beginning of healing. They're the start of those. The first time you share your story is like a first step into healing from whatever you're going through. And that's part of why I love podcasting, is because of that shared experience and what it can bring to someone, and even myself included. Listening to the stories that I've listened to over the last year have healed parts of me that I wasn't expecting. And I'm sure you can attest to that too.
Definitely.
Just that, like, the amounts, like, I started this as to help others, and little did I know how much it helps me and how much it grounds me and reminds me and gives me grateful and joy, and that, anything I ever hear or say, I never take for granted.
That is beautiful. And that's so true. We heal as we help others. And it's a full circle thing that just keeps helping us, helping them, and on and on and on we go. Thank you for all you're doing. And as a final question, what would Liz today say to Liz after Olivia's passing?
Oh, that's a good question. Just keep going. Just keep going. Life's beautiful. It's messy. It's hard, but it's worth it.
Thank you so much, Liz. It's been an absolute honor.
Thank you again so much.
That's it for today's episode. Be sure to subscribe to the Grief and Light podcast. I'd also love to connect with you and hear your thoughts and your stories. Feel free to share them with me via my Instagram page at Grief and Light, or you can also visit griefandlight.com for more information and updates. Thank you so much for being here, for being you, and always remember, you are not alone.